Watch closely." Her husband held the door for another woman, while his mother pointed to the street. "Get out," the old woman said. "This house is finally ours again." The crowd went silent. She said nothing. She only bent down, picked up her small suitcase from the wet stone, and walked into the rain. And not one soul in that shining mansion knew the truth. Not one of them knew who had really bought the house they once forbade her to enter. They didn't know she had signed the papers herself for $20 billion. But let me take you back, because to understand the rain, you have to understand the woman standing in it. Her name was Zola, and that night, the great stone mansion on the hill was glowing like a birthday cake. Every window burned gold. Long black cars lined the driveway. Inside, glasses clinked, and laughter rolled from room to room like music. The Bellamy family was celebrating. After years of quiet shame, after years of pretending, they had finally sold the old family estate, and the price had saved them. Loretta Bellamy stood at the top of the grand staircase like a queen returned to her throne. She wore pearls that had been in the family for 3 generations. She lifted her glass, and the room hushed for her. "To this family," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "To surviving, and to the buyer who saved us, whoever they are." A ripple of laughter moved through the guests. "Little House Holdings," Loretta said, and she chuckled at the name. "Can you believe it? A company worth more than this whole city, and they call themselves a little house." The guests laughed with her. They toasted a name they thought was a joke. Remember that name. You'll want to remember it. At the edge of the room, near the tall windows, stood Zola. She was quiet, the way she was always quiet. She held a glass she wasn't drinking. Her free hand rested inside the pocket of her coat, and her fingers moved slowly over something small and wooden that no one could see. She watched her husband's family celebrate. She watched them toast a stranger, and she said nothing at all. Who was she to them? A carpenter's daughter? A girl from the poor side of the river who had somehow married their son? For 6 years they had looked at her like a stain on a white shirt, and tonight they didn't even see her. Then the front doors opened, and Terrence walked in. Zola's husband, tall, handsome, dressed in a suit that cost more than his own pride. But he did not walk in alone. On his arm was a woman in a red dress, Renee, the family's realtor, the woman who had brokered the entire sale. And Terrence held the door the way a man holds a door for someone he wants. His hand touched the small of her back. He smiled at her. He did not look for his wife. Have you ever watched a marriage die while everyone around you keeps dancing? Zola set her glass down on the windowsill, slowly. Loretta had already crossed the room. The old woman moved like she had waited 6 long years for this exact moment. She stopped in front of Zola, and she did not lower her voice. "You're not blood. You never were. This was never your home, and now it belongs to someone new, so there's no reason for you to still be standing in it." The nearest guests turned. Phones came up. Someone started recording. "Loretta?" Zola said softly. "Just the name, nothing more." "Don't Loretta me," the old woman's mouth curled. "Get out! This house is finally ours again, and we sold it clean, clean of you." Renee drifted closer, that red dress moving like a slow flame. She looked Zola up and down, and she smiled the kind of smile that cuts deeper than a slap. "Sweetheart," Renee said, "you just don't fit the picture anymore. You never really did." "And Terrence?" Zola turned to her husband. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you're giving them one last chance to be the man you married. "Terrence," she said. He looked at the floor. "Just go, Zola, please. Don't make a scene." Don't make a scene. 6 years of marriage, and that was his goodbye. Loretta snapped at a staff member. Zola's small suitcase, already packed, already waiting by the wall because they had planned this, was carried to the front door and thrown out. It landed on the wet stone of the driveway and it burst open in the rain. Her few clothes spilled across the ground. The guests gasped. Then a few of them laughed, and the phones kept recording. Zola did not cry. She did not beg. She walked to the door with her back straight. She stepped out into the rain. She knelt down on the cold stone, and one by one she gathered her things back into the case. The rain soaked her hair, ran down her face, dripped from her chin. Behind her, through the glass, the party went on. She stood. She lifted the suitcase, and she looked back once, just once, at the golden windows and the people laughing inside. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she walked down that long driveway and disappeared into the dark. They thought they had thrown out a nobody. They thought they had swept the last of the trash from their beautiful house. But watch closely, my friend, because a quiet woman is not a weak woman. And what none of them knew that night, what not a single one of them could have imagined, was about to tear this whole family down to its foundation. But to understand what she was carrying, you have to understand where she came from. Long before the mansion, long before the marriage, there was a small house on the poor side of the river. 2 rooms, a tin roof that sang when it rained, and in that house lived a girl and her father. His name was Ezra, and Ezra built houses. He was a carpenter, the best in the whole county, though no one with money ever said so out loud. Ezra's hands could turn a pile of lumber into a doorway that made you feel welcome. He built grand homes for grand families, homes with staircases and tall windows and porches wide enough to dance on. He built them for other people. And then, every evening, he walked home to 2 rented rooms and a roof that leaked. Zola grew up watching her father build palaces he would never live in. She watched rich men shake his hand and then forget his name. She watched him kneel in the sawdust, tired to the bone, and still hum a song while he worked. And she never once heard him complain. One night, when she was small, she asked him, "Daddy, why do we build big houses for other people, but we live in a little one?" Ezra set down his tools. He reached into his apron and he pulled out something he had been carving for weeks. It was a tiny wooden house, small enough to fit in the palm of a child's hand. Every window carved just so. A little door, a little roof that would never leak. He pressed it into her hand and closed her fingers around it. "Baby girl," he said, "a home is not walls. A home is not how big it is or how much it cost. A home is where nobody can ever put you out. And one day, you hear me? One day, you will have a home like that. A home no one can ever take from you, no matter what." She kept that little wooden house. She kept it through everything. Through the winter, her father caught a chill on a rich man's rooftop and never quite got well. Through the morning, she found his tools gone cold in the shed. Ezra died the way he lived, on a ladder, finishing another man's mansion, building beauty for a family that didn't come to his funeral. Zola was 19. She had a box of carpenter's tools, a tiny wooden house, and a promise ringing in her ears. And here is the thing about a promise from a good man. It doesn't die when he does. It grows. She took her father's trade and she made it something he could never have dreamed. She learned the business of building, then the business of land, then the business of money itself. She was patient. She was quiet. She worked in the dark for years and she told almost no one. She didn't want to be loved for what she had. She had watched money turn people into strangers her whole life. She wanted more than anything to be loved for who she was. So she stayed small. Little House, a quiet name for a quiet woman with an empire hidden behind it. And it grew in the dark,
the way roots grow. She bought her first piece of land with the last of her father's savings and a nerve she didn't know she had. She built on it. She sold it. She bought 2 more. She learned that the men in the tall glass buildings were not smarter than her father. They were only louder. So she let them be loud, and she stayed quiet. And while they talked, she signed.
Year after year, deal after deal, she built something enormous out of nothing but a dead man's promise and a pair of hands that refused to quit. She never put her face on any of it. She never let her name be printed. She was the most powerful person in rooms she was never even seen in. And still, every single night, she came home and set a little wooden house on her nightstand. Because the empire was never the point. The empire was just the tool. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was the one thing her father promised her in a leaking room in the rain. A home. A real one. A place where nobody could ever put her out. That was the hole in her heart that no amount of building could fill. And it was the hole that Terence walked right into. And then she met Terence. And for the first time since her father died, she let herself hope. He was charming back then. He made her laugh. He didn't seem to care that she came from the poor side of the river, or so she believed. When they married, his family looked down their noses, and she told herself love would soften them in time. She signed a paper before the wedding, a paper his family demanded, a paper that said if the marriage ever ended, she would walk away with nothing of theirs. She signed it without blinking. Why would she care about their money? She had her own. They just didn't know it. Remember that paper. It's going to matter more than anyone thinks. So she kept her secret, and she loved her husband, and she carried a little wooden house in her pocket everywhere she went. She thought she had finally found the home her father promised her. She was wrong, but not in the way you think. Because the family she married into was already falling apart from the inside, and a falling family will always look for someone to blame. The Bellamys were not as rich as they pretended. For years, they had been living on a name instead of a bank account. The old family money had thinned to nothing. The mansion drank money, repairs, taxes, staff, the endless cost of looking wealthy. And Terence, who had been raised to believe he was a prince, woke up one day a grown man with an empty crown. That kind of shame does something to a person. It looks for a place to land. And for Terence, it landed on his wife. Because she was calm when he panicked, she was steady when he raged. She never seemed afraid of being poor, and somehow that made him hate her instead of love her. How could she be so peaceful when his whole world was cracking? What did she know that he didn't? The question ate at him. And that's when Renee arrived. Renee came to sell the mansion, but she stayed to sell Terence a story. She was polished, ambitious, and she saw exactly what Terence needed to hear. She told him he was too good for his life, too good for a quiet wife who dressed plain and came from nothing. A man like him, she whispered, needed a woman who matched his name, a real society wife, someone who could restore what his family had lost. "You married down," Renee told him one evening, her voice like honey. "A man doesn't rise with an anchor around his neck." And Terence, drowning in his own shame, decided the anchor was Zola. Now here is where it gets cruel, because Zola had a secret, but it wasn't the secret they imagined. She had been slipping away at night, taking calls behind closed doors, whispering into the phone and going quiet when he walked in. She'd disappear for a day and come back saying only that she'd had business. To a guilty man looking for a reason, it looked one thing and one thing only: an affair. Terence never asked her the truth. Do you know why? Because the lie was more useful to him. If she was cheating, then he was the victim. If she was cheating, then throwing her away wasn't cruelty. It was justice. A man will believe anything that lets him keep thinking he's the good one. But the calls were not a lover. The calls were her board of directors,
The calls were her lawyers. The calls were the quiet machinery of an empire she had still not told a single soul about. She was managing a fortune from the shadows and coming home to make her husband dinner. And he repaid her by counting her footsteps and calling it evidence.
Loretta made it worse. The old woman had never accepted Zola, not for one day. To Loretta, this marriage was a wound, a carpenter's daughter in her bloodline. She wanted it gone. And when the chance came to sell the mansion and start fresh, she saw her opening. Get rid of the girl. Do it before the sale closes. Do it clean. There was only one problem in their plan, one loose thread that made all three of them nervous. That paper. The prenuptial agreement. What if, somehow, it gave Zola a claim? What if she fought? So they moved fast and dirty. Terrence signed documents behind his wife's back, Renee handled the paperwork with a smile, and Loretta planned the night, the party, the toast, the eviction in front of witnesses, so the whole world would see Zola leave, and no one would ever call it anything but her choice. They thought they were being so clever. They had no idea who they were stealing from. Now let me tell you about the fortune she had built in silence, because you deserve to understand what these people were actually standing on. The quiet empire Zola had grown from her father's toolbox had become so large that she could have bought that entire hill, every mansion, every gate, every long black car, and every driveway 10 times over and never felt it. To her, the sum that had saved the Bellamy family was the kind of money you might drop between the cushions of a couch. It was pocket change to a woman who owned things most people would never even hear the names of. And yet, the one thing all that money had never bought her was a family that wanted her. She had houses on 3 continents and no home. She had a name that made bankers stand up when she entered a room, and a husband who wouldn't look at her across the dinner table. Do you see the cruelty of it? She was worth more than every person at that party combined, and they had just thrown her clothes into the rain. Money is a strange thing. It can buy the walls. It can never buy the home. So there she was, the night of the sale, standing in a cheap motel room across town, still damp from the rain, her suitcase open on a stiff bed. She set the little wooden house on the small table by the window, and for the first time in a long time, Zola broke. She didn't scream. That wasn't her way. She sat down in the hard chair and she stared at that carving her father made, and something inside her went very, very quiet. Not the peaceful quiet, the dangerous quiet. The quiet of a woman who has finally reached the end of what she can forgive. 6 years. 6 years of trying to earn love from people who had already decided to hate her. 6 years of shrinking herself so they wouldn't feel small beside her. She had hidden her whole life to be loved, and they had thrown her out anyway. So what exactly had the hiding bought her? She thought about her father. She thought about all the mornings he had come home with splinters in his hands and a smile on his face, building beauty for people who would never learn his name. And she understood, sitting in that cheap little room, that she had spent 6 years doing the very same thing, building a warm home for a cold family, pouring her whole soft heart into people who only wanted the walls. She had made herself smaller and smaller, hoping that if she took up less space, they might finally make room for her in their hearts. And all her shrinking had earned her a suitcase in the rain. She had a choice now. She could keep being invisible, or she could let them see exactly what they had thrown away. She picked up the little wooden house. She turned it over in her hands, and a strange calm came over her. The calm of a woman who has finally stopped asking to be loved by people who never planned to love her. Enough. Enough of the hiding. Enough of the shrinking. Enough of the silence that they mistook for weakness. She sat in that silence for hours, and somewhere in those hours, something changed. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. She knew the number. She let it ring twice more while she wiped her face with the back of her hand. Then she answered, and when she spoke,
Her voice was steady as stone. "Yes," she said. A pause. "Is the board ready?" Another pause. She looked at the little wooden house on the table. "Then proceed with the handover. All of it, exactly as we planned, and schedule the ceremony. I'll be there myself this time."
She ended the call. She picked up the carving. She held it to her chest. "You see, my friend, a quiet woman is not a weak woman. She's just a woman deciding how loud the truth is finally going to be. And in 3 days, at the handover of the very mansion they had thrown her out of, the truth was going to be very loud indeed." But what happened at that ceremony, no one, not one soul in that family, ever saw it coming. The day of the handover arrived cold and bright. By law, when a property like the Bellamy estate changes hands, there is a formal transfer. The deed is signed. The keys are passed. The buyer or the buyer's representative meets the seller face to face. The Bellamys had turned even this into a spectacle. Of course they had. They invited press. They invited friends. They set out food and flowers in the great hall of the house they were about to lose, as if losing it were a triumph. They wanted the world to watch them hand over the mansion with their heads held high, richer than ever, saved by a mysterious buyer they had never met. They set a single empty chair at the long table for the buyer's representative, some faceless lawyer they assumed from that oddly named company, Little House Holdings. Loretta wore the pearls again. Terence stood near his mother, and Renee stood near Terence in another dress made to be noticed. They were laughing softly among themselves when the tall doors at the end of the hall swung open, and Zola walked in. She did not look like the woman they had thrown into the rain. She wore a long, dark coat, tailored, quiet, expensive in the way that real money is quiet. Her head was high, her steps were slow and certain, and in one hand, held gently against her side, was a small wooden house. The room turned. The whispers started. Loretta's face went sharp. What is she doing here? She lifted a hand toward the staff. "Security! She was not invited. Someone remove her from my—" "Your what?" a voice said. It was Mr. Coleman, the family's own attorney, the man who had handled the Bellamy affairs for 20 years. He had risen slowly from his seat at the table, and his face was pale, and he was looking at Zola the way a man looks at something he is only now beginning to understand. "Mrs. Loretta," Coleman said, and his voice shook just slightly, "you may want to sit down." "I will not sit down in my own house." "It is not your house," Coleman swallowed. "It hasn't been your house since the sale closed. It belongs to the buyer." He turned and he looked at Zola, and then he said the words that split that room in two. "It belongs to her. Loretta, she is the principal. Zola is Little House Holdings. Your daughter-in-law is the buyer. She bought this estate. She bought all of it." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, the kind you can feel pressing on your chest. Terence's face drained white. That's not possible," he stammered. "She doesn't have, she's nobody. She's a carpenter's—" "She's a carpenter's daughter," Zola said, and she smiled, small and sad. "Yes, I am." "Go on, Terence, say it. You always said it like it was a curse." She stepped forward into the center of the great hall, under the tall windows her own father might have built. "Let me help all of you understand," she said, and her voice was calm, so terribly calm. "I signed a paper before I married your son, a paper your family demanded, a paper that if this marriage ever ended, I would walk away with nothing that belonged to the Bellamys." She let that sit. "I signed it in 1 second. I never blinked. Do you know why?" She looked around the room, at Loretta, at Renee, at the husband who wouldn't meet her eyes. "Because I never wanted anything of yours. I never needed a single dollar you had. I came into this family with more than this family ever dreamed of, and I hid it because I wanted just once to be loved by people who didn't know." She turned to face Terence fully now. "Everything you sold to save yourselves, you sold to me. Every brick of this house, the house you threw me out of, the house your mother said was finally yours again,
It was mine before her toast was even finished. Loretta reached for a chair and sat down hard. The pearls suddenly looked like glass. But Zola wasn't finished, because there was one more truth, and this one belonged to the woman in the noticeable dress. Zola reached into her coat and she drew out a slim folder and she set it on the long table and slid it down its length. It stopped in front of Renee. "You should look at that," Zola said quietly. "My people already have." Renee opened it. Her smile fell off her face like a picture off a wall. Inside were numbers, transfers, the quiet, ugly proof that Renee had been skimming from the sale, inflating fees, hiding cuts, robbing the very family she was pretending to save. She had planned to walk away rich from both ends. And now it was all laid out in black and white in a folder held by the one woman she thought was powerless. Terrence stared at the folder, then at Renee. "What is that?" he said. "Renee, what did you do?" But Zola lifted a hand, and somehow, even now, the whole room obeyed her. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't waste it on each other. It's already done." She looked at all of them then. The mother who threw her out, the husband who wouldn't look at her, the woman who wore red to a funeral she didn't know she was attending. And she said the last thing, the thing that would echo in that family for the rest of their lives. "You sold your home for a fortune, and you were so proud. You thought money had saved you." Her voice broke, just once, just barely. "I would have given it to you for nothing, every brick, for free. If just one time, one single time in 6 years, any of you had looked at me and called me family." No one spoke. What was there to say? Zola walked to the great stone fireplace at the head of the hall. And there on the mantel of the home she now owned, she set down the little wooden house her father had carved with his tired hands. She placed it gently, the way you set down something holy. Then she straightened, and she looked at it. And for a moment she wasn't a billionaire at all. She was a girl in a 2-room house, listening to a promise in the rain. "One day, you'll have a home no one can ever put you out of." "I'm home, Daddy," she whispered, too soft for anyone to hear. Then she turned and faced the silent room one last time. A quiet woman is not a weak woman. Remember that. Remember it every time the world looks at someone plain and decides they're small. Now, you might think that was the end, the reveal, the reversal. But justice isn't only the moment the truth comes out. Justice is what the truth does after. And what the truth did to the Bellamy family over the days and weeks that followed was slow, and it was total. Start with Terrence. Terrence had built his whole sense of himself on a lie, that he was a man of means, a man of name, a prince who had briefly fallen on hard times. The sale of the mansion was supposed to restore all of it. The mysterious buyer was supposed to put the crown back on his head. But that buyer had turned out to be his own wife. And the moment the marriage was over, the moment the truth was out, he understood something that hollowed him from the inside. He was never rich. He had married rich, and he had thrown it into the rain with his own hands. Everything that had felt like his, the comfort, the safety, the sudden windfall that was going to fund his fresh start, all of it flowed from the woman he had betrayed. The accounts, the standing, the soft landing, it had a single source, and the source now looked at him with nothing but pity. He was not a wealthy man who'd lost his footing. He was a poor man who had been carried for 6 years by a wife he was too proud to see. And Renee was gone before the ink on her exposure was dry. She had come for the money and the status, and now there was neither. When the fraud came to light, her name turned to poison. No family with anything to sell would let her near their door. The doors that used to open for her closed one by one. And Terrence, broke, disgraced Terence was no longer of any use to a woman who only ever loved a bank balance. She told him so. On her way out, she turned and gave him one last look, and there was no honey left in her voice at all. You had one job, marry up, and somehow you managed to marry down twice. Then she walked away in her red dress, and she did not look back, and Terence learned the coldest lesson a betrayer ever learns, that the person who helped you betray will betray you just as easily. Then there was Loretta. The old woman had worshipped one thing her whole life, not God, not family, status, what people thought when the Bellamy name was spoken. And status is a cruel god. It gives you nothing and it takes everything, and it turns on you the instant you stumble.
The video of Zola in the rain had spread. So had the story of the handover. The carpenter's daughter who turned out to own it all. The mother-in-law who threw a billionaire into the street and didn't even know it. The society Loretta had spent her life impressing did not rush to her side. They laughed. Behind their hands at first, and then not even bothering to hide it. The invitations stopped. The pearls stayed in their box because where was there left to wear them? And here is the strangest mercy of the whole story. Zola did not put Loretta on the street. She could have. She owned everything now, every property the family had, right down to the small rented house Loretta had quietly moved into when the pride finally ran out. Zola owned that too, and she let the old woman keep it. 2 rooms, a roof that when it rained made a soft sound against the tin. Do you understand? The woman who had thrown a carpenter's daughter out of a mansion now lived in the same kind of house that carpenter had raised his daughter in. Not out of Zola's revenge, out of Zola's mercy. And somehow that was heavier than any punishment could ever be. Terence came to see Zola near the end. He found her at the mansion, standing in the great hall where it had all come apart. He looked older, smaller. The charm was gone, and without it there wasn't much left. "Zola," he said, "I didn't know, I swear to you, I didn't know who you were." She looked at him for a long moment, and when she answered, there was no anger in it, only something quieter and sadder than anger. "That was always the problem, Terence," she said. "You never wanted to know me, not the real me. You only ever wanted to know what I could make you look like." She shook her head slowly. "You had all of me for 6 years, and you never once went looking for it." He opened his mouth. He closed it. There was nothing to say that was a years too late. Zola walked past him to the tall doors, and she opened them herself. She did not throw him out. She did not raise her voice. She simply held the door, the way once he had held a door for another woman, and she waited. And Terence, with nothing left to argue and no one left to blame, walked out of the house that used to be his, into the light, alone. She closed the door softly behind him. No slam. A quiet woman never needs to slam a door. So what does a woman do with a mansion full of ghosts? She could have sold it. She could have burned every memory to the ground and walked away and never looked back. No one would have blamed her. But Zola was Ezra's daughter, and Ezra didn't tear things down. Ezra built. So she changed the house. She kept the tall windows and the wide staircases her father's kind of hands had made, but she filled the rooms with something they had never held before: children. The mansion on the hill, the great cold monument to a family that loved status more than people, became a home for the children of laborers and working mothers, sons and daughters of carpenters and cleaners and cooks, the people who build the beautiful houses and never get to live in them. She named it Ezra's house. At the front entrance, in a small case of glass, she placed the little wooden house her father had carved when she was a girl. One afternoon, a small boy stood in front of that glass case, frowning up at it. He tugged Zola's sleeve. "Miss," he said, "why is that just a little wooden house? You've got this whole big place. Why keep the small one where everybody can see?"
Zola knelt down beside him so they were the same height. She looked at the carving and she smiled, and there was the whole story in that smile. Because my father made it for me when we didn't have anything at all. And he taught me something I never forgot. A home is not the walls, baby. It's not how big it is or how much it costs. She touched the glass gently. A home is where nobody can ever make you feel small. That little house taught me that, so it gets the best spot in the whole building. The boy thought about that. Then he nodded, the way children nod when they've decided something is true, and he ran off to play in the tall, bright rooms that no one would ever put him out of. Zola stood and she watched him go, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, her heart was quiet in the good way.
And she did not do it once and walk away. She did it again and again. She found other cold houses on other hills, houses built for pride and emptied by it, and she opened their doors to the people who had spent their lives cleaning them. She hired the sons of carpenters. She paid the daughters of maids to run the offices. She built a quiet army of people the world had overlooked, and she handed them the keys to rooms their parents had only ever entered through the back. Some nights, when the halls were empty, she would walk through Ezra's house alone. She would run her hand along a banister and think about the tired man who taught her that beautiful things are made by unseen hands. She would stop at the glass case by the door and look at the little carving, and she would say the same two words she always said, "Thank you, Daddy." And the house, when the rain came, would answer with that same soft sound against the roof that she had loved her whole life. She spent her days handing out keys now, real keys to real homes for people the world had decided didn't matter. Every key she pressed into a tired hand was her father's promise, kept and kept again. A home no one can take from you, no matter what. And that is the whole story. The carpenter's daughter they threw into the rain, the mansion she owned before they even finished laughing, the fortune that could buy anything except the one thing she wanted, and the peace she finally found when she stopped waiting for cruel people to love her and started building homes for people who would. So let me leave you with this. Never measure a person by what they let you see. The quietest one in the room, the plain one, the one you're tempted to overlook, that is so often the one carrying the most. Be gentle with the quiet ones. You never know whose home you're standing in. Because a quiet woman is not a weak woman. She never was. If Zola's silence moved you tonight, do something for her. Hit that like button so more people find this story. Subscribe if you believe kindness always finds its way home in the end. And comment one word, Ezra, if you promise you'll never judge a quiet soul again. Then share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. A quiet woman is not a weak woman. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, watch closely.